Hello, I'm Greg Cooley, one of the Sunday school teachers here at First United Methodist Church in Corinth, Mississippi. It's always great to have you with us. Now, we are up to principle number 8 as we work through the book of Job and look at Job's life, some things that maybe we can apply to ourselves. Quick review here. There's Job. He had everything. He was very blessed. Actually, we say he was a person who went from successful to miserable. And we know why, because the devil and God had a conversation about him and his integrity. We also know about the 3 friends who come to see him and his wife. We know about Job's struggle and the loss of all those children and all those possessions. And we're up to this principle. Now, this principle is a principle that probably my English teacher is not going to be very happy with me as I frame it for you, because I'm going to give you a principle that's actually a question. This principle, principle number 8, is, do you know what God's definition of wonderful is? Is it the same as your definition of wonderful? What would be the average American's definition of a wonderful life? Well, let's see. The bills would be paid, and I'd have good health, and I'd have a loving and supportive and beautiful spouse, and my children would be well behaved, and I'd have respectful and supportive friends, and I'd be well traveled, and well known. All those are things that we would describe as having a wonderful life. Nothing wrong with those things, and most of those things Job had. But what's God's definition of a wonderful life? Does it have anything to do with these possessions? Does it have anything to do with what my mental state is at a particular time, especially the time when I'm under the julep tree and drinking from its sustenance and feet in the sand and all that? What is God's definition of wonderful? Let's look at what Job was dealing with about halfway through his suffering. In Job chapter 3, we see something about Job's attitude and maybe his depressive situation that makes us uncomfortable. In Job chapter 3 and verse 3, we hear Job say this: I wish the day had perished when I was born, and the night that I was conceived as a man-child, I wish it was gone too. If you go down a few more verses in chapter 11 verse 11 of chapter 3, we see this: why did I not die at birth? Why did I come forth from the womb and not expire? Those questions. Oh, by the way, those questions are not necessarily rhetorical questions that Job has for you and me. These are questions that Job has for God. Why did the day not perish when I was conceived? Why did I not die as I came from the womb? I don't know if I'm comfortable with those questions. I don't know if those are the kinds of questions that I anticipated coming from Job, the Job of legend, the Job that got through all this without any whining. What's happening here with Job? Is Job depressed? Well, maybe. Is Job challenging God? Yes. Is Job hurting? Most definitely. I think one of the reasons that Job is hurting, and I got this from a reading from Charles Swindoll when he talks about God being silent. I think that Job is hurting because he may have lost his best friend for a moment. Friend with a capital F, God. Remember, God and Job, they were on the same page, and God was really rewarding Job, and Job's life was wonderful. And Job consistently communicated with God. You know, we talked a week or two ago about this frequency that Job and God were on. And then God is silent. And then all the suffering comes. And Job starts to say, "Where are you, man? I mean, without you here to help me and to answer my questions and to encourage me and give me direction, I wish I'd never been born." Have you ever questioned God? Have you ever gone through a time in your life where you felt dry spiritually? And when this particular time of your life would not be a time that you define as wonderful? Job can identify with you, and you can identify with Job. There are times in all of our lives when our life will not be described as wonderful. You ever taken care of an aging parent? You ever had a sick child? You ever had a spouse say, "I'd rather not be married anymore"? You ever had a business fail? You ever filed a bankruptcy? Have you ever been dry at church? You ever lost a job? Yeah. Those are times that really don't fit into the definition of the wonderful life. Those are times that you're probably going to find yourself alone a little bit because you're going through something that the rest of us don't want to be reminded is a possibility. So we're going to probably marginalize you. I'm sorry. That's what we do as human nature. And there you are, probably in the most need of comfort, in the most need of a kind word, in the most need of friendship, and you don't have any. So, what's God's definition of a wonderful life? Can I have a wonderful life even if I've experienced things like that, or I'm experiencing something like that now? This is God's definition, I think, of a wonderful life for His children. Number one is He in control. Are you allowing Him to be in control of your life? Are you making all your decisions on your own, or are you making decisions based on Him and His direction and His timing? Are you trying to rush this next home purchase? Are you trying to rush this next job promotion? Are you trying to rush when you have children? My wife and I experienced 14 years of what the Bible would call barrenness. We had no children. Problems with fertility. 14 years. The first 14 years of our marriage. No children. And there were times we tried to rush it. Right there at the end, before we took another track and God led us to another option for children, adoption. By the way, I have the two world's greatest adopted children. I love my daughters. And I'm convinced that they were sent to us by God. Because at the end of our struggle with the fertility thing, I was in the shower one day after a morning jog. And I'd taken that morning jog alone, and nobody else was with me, and I had come in, and Karen was at the other end of the house, and I'd gone straight to the shower. And while I'd been on my jog, I'd been trying to commune with God and talk with God here, because time was a-wasting. I was getting close to 40 years old. We had no children. And I was frustrated, and I felt like we could be a good home to children. So I get in the shower, and I'm basically asking God, why are you, we got all this science, and my wife's taking all this medication, and we're doing all this stuff, and shots and everything, and we're listening, and we're following the protocols. Why aren't you answering me? Where's the child? My wife is hurt. My wife is wondering, where are you, God? And as I'm in the shower, it's as if God spoke to me. And I got this feeling in my soul that almost made me go to my knees and begin to weep, because I got this question: Do you have any idea what your plan is doing to her body? Do you have any idea what your plan is doing to work against my plan? And I thought, well, what I'm doing is logical. What I'm doing is what the doctors say we should do. But maybe I am rushing things, or maybe I'm just bullheadedly working down one road, the road where there's going to be a natural childbirth in the Cooley household. Maybe God has another plan that I need to listen to. So I got out of the shower and dried off, wrapped the towel around me, and walked in the kitchen. My wife is in there having her morning coffee, and I said to her, I think we need to rethink this thing that we're doing, and maybe we need to think about adoption. And she began to cry. She said, I've been waiting for you to say that. I've felt it for quite some time. And within a couple years, after we had gone around and interviewed a number of adoption agencies, we settled on one, and we had this child that was brought to us by the grace of God, 5 days old, when they called us and told us, your daughter, she's been born a couple days ago. Come down here in a couple days and pick her up. We had 2 days, by the way, to get a nursery ready. But we did it. The community stepped in because they knew the struggle we'd been through. And I tell you that story to tell you that maybe the thing that I'm going through, maybe the thing I'm depressed about, maybe the thing that doesn't seem to be working for me is a thing I've created. Is a thing that I've done without eliciting God's input, without thinking that maybe He's down this path and I'm trying to force the issue down this path. So the first question is God in control? Because that's the first, I think, tenet of a wonderful life, based on what God's definition is. Is He in control? Second point of what God's definition of a wonderful life would be is, do we surrender once we find His direction, His control? Once we say, yes, Lord, the way I'm doing this is not the way it should be done. Yeah, I do think you have an alternative path. With just identifying that and just recognizing that He may have an alternative path is not necessarily accomplishing anything. I have to surrender from this path and change gears and go with Him. Do I go with Him? Do I surrender and allow His control and His new path to be known to me? And thirdly, after I realize He is in control, and He should be, and secondly, after I have surrendered to Him, then is His will what I want to live by? In other words, once I get on this path and He reveals to me what I need to be doing, and I have opened myself up and I've surrendered to His direction, now will I live by it? So, you say you want to lose weight, and you go to the lady next door that stays in shape all the time. So you walk over there and you say, hey, I need to lose a little weight. Tell me how I need to be doing this diet exercise thing differently than I have been. So you acknowledge that somebody else has the input. And she says, well, you need to learn to count calories, and you need to understand fat grams, and you need to know about protein intake, and you need to know about exercise and sweat and all these things. And she starts to give me the advice. Now the next question is, do I take it and do I apply it? Do I do the work? Do I allow myself to live by that direction? Back to God. Do I allow myself, do I actively engage in His will once it's become known to me? That's what God wants. He wants to be in control. He wants us to acknowledge His control and to forfeit where we have been, and then He wants us to follow and work in that vein. That's God's definition of wonderful. Now, that sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like I'm not going to always get my way. It sounds like I'm going to have to surrender. It sounds like I'm going to have to give Him my mind, soul, body, and checkbook. And that may not work into my definition of wonderful, because, you know, my checkbook can buy a whole lot of my definition of wonderful. My checkbook can buy me a new car. That would work right into my definition of wonderful. But God may say, you know that $30,000 you were going to spend over there? I want it over here. Ooh. I don't know about that, God. That's that third principle of not just knowing what God's will is, but actually living by it. And writing the check joyfully. God's definition of wonderful? Do I really want to know that? Haven't I been taught that my definition, the American dream, is what God is all about? And if I don't have that, then I must be outside God's will. And the answer is no, that's not it. I may be in God's will and not live in $1 million home. I may be in God's will and not live in America. I may be in God's will and not have a 401k. He's going to take care of me, because the first tenet of wonderful is He's in control. He just may have to change my definition of comfort and wonderful. Now, if I'm controlled by my own definition of wonderful, I'm opening myself up to, you know, what happens in the real world. And most of the time, this definition of wonderful I have is almost a dream anyway. And so then the real life happens to me. And if I stay in my definition of wonderful, I'm opening myself up to frustration and to depression and to resentment. You ever known anybody like that? See, that they were all about their definition of wonderful. Many times I'm all about my definition of wonderful. Then life happens. I get sick, or a family member gets sick, or the business venture didn't work out like I wanted it to. What's wrong, God? And I start to whine. And then if things don't work out next year, I become depressed. And then I become resentful. And then I'm frustrated. And then I just quit. Why? Because I was controlled by my definition of wonderful. The wonderful life. Not God's definition of wonderful. God can take it when I question Him and when I'm in the midst of my definition of wonderful and I'm doing this transition over to Him being in control and Him giving me direction and me surrendering to it and following through. When I'm doing all that and when I'm just like Job was and I say things that are gloomy and things that are not positive, God can take it. He actually knows that I may be in this transition period here, and this may be the most important part of the journey. So I go back to my example of you going next door, knocking on the door of your neighbor and saying, I need some direction about my diet and exercise. You seem to look good in your jeans, and you seem to be always peppy and happy. Tell me what I need to do. And they tell us, and we say, ooh, I got to get up earlier. I've got to walk or jog every day. I have to learn something about calorie count. And I start to whine. Right there is the inflection point of, am I going to do it or not? And God understands that you and I have those times in our lives. He understands that from time to time, I'm there at that point that is very critical. Am I going to go down His road or fall back into mine, into my depression and frustration and resentment? And God can take it when I whine. God can take it when I question. My neighbor who is self-assured about the way to do this, she can take it when I say, well, my shoes don't fit very well. Then she's going to say, buy new shoes. And I'm going to say, but I don't like fruit. I like desserts. Well, you're going to have to get used to it. Those are very critical times into the development of my attitude. But when I develop it, and I give control to Him, and I allow Him to influence me with His definition of wonderful, life's issues are not that big a deal. We just say, like you and I do with the weather, it'll change tomorrow. I'll get through this. God must have something in mind that I don't understand. All I have to do is stay vigilant and work and trust. And I don't get frustrated and depressed and resentful. Maybe I can become a witness to somebody as to what the real wonderful life is all about. Well, we hope for you the wonderful life, God's definition of the wonderful life. And if today you've realized you've always lived in your definition, or the world's definition, or America's definition, or your brother-in-law's definition of what a wonderful life is, maybe you need to stop. Say, God, I want you to be in control. I want to surrender to you, and I want to follow through. May you be blessed as you do.